My parents drained their secret savings to buy my unemployed brother a luxury electric vehicle while tossing me the keys to a rusted death trap. They believed I would be their retirement plan. Instead, I drove straight to a dealership, bought a Porsche, and watched their financial safety net vanish forever. Before we begin today's story, we have an urgent announcement. Due to technical issues, this channel is shutting down. But don't worry, the stories continue. Please subscribe to our new channel, Daily Drip Stories. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The metal felt like it was disintegrating in my palm. That was the first thing I noticed, not the weight of the keys, but the gritty, oxidized texture of rust flaking off against my skin. I stared down at them, a single, jagged key on a wire loop with no fob, no remote, just a piece of metal that looked like it had been dredged up from the bottom of a lake. 10 feet away, the late afternoon sun glinted violently off the polished obsidian hood of a brand-new, top-of-the-line Tesla Model S Plaid. It was sleek, silent, and aggressive, a $100,000 machine that screamed status. My brother, Caleb, was leaning against it, his arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips that he didn't even try to hide. He looked like he had just won a lottery he hadn't bought a ticket for. "Happy birthday, kiddos," my father, Frank, said, his voice booming with that performative generosity he always adopted when he wanted an audience. He wiped his hands on his jeans, beaming at Caleb, then spared a quick, dismissive glance in my direction. "We wanted to be fair, set you both up for the next chapter of your lives." I looked from the rusted key in my hand to the Tesla, then to the driveway behind Frank where my gift was parked. It was a 2002 beige sedan. The clear coat was peeling like sunburned skin, revealing patchy, dull paint underneath. The front bumper was held on by what looked like zip ties and hope, and the car sat unevenly, listing to the left as if the suspension had given up the ghost a decade ago. "Fair," the word scraped its way out of my throat. My chest felt tight, a physical pressure clamping down on my lungs. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't want the Tesla. I didn't even like electric cars that much. It was the sheer, unadulterated disparity of it. It was the mathematical proof of how little I mattered. "Now, Amelia, don't start," my mother, Maria, chimed in, stepping off the porch to stand next to Frank. She smoothed her apron, her eyes darting around the neighborhood to make sure none of the neighbors were witnessing anything other than a happy family moment. "Caleb needs a reliable vehicle. He's starting that consulting business. Image is everything in his industry, you know that." "He's 30 years old, Mom," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "He hasn't held a job for longer than 6 months since he graduated high school, and you bought him a car that costs more than a down payment on a house." "It's an investment," Frank barked, his smile dropping instantly. He hated being questioned, especially by me. "And you have a job, a steady job. You can fix that sedan up. It's a mechanic's special. Good bones teaches character." "Character," I repeated, looking at the bald tires on the beige monstrosity. "Dad, that car isn't safe. Look at the tires. There's no tread. It's practically illegal to drive." Caleb laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Don't be ungrateful, Aim. A car is a car. Besides, not everyone can handle the power of a Plaid. You'd probably crash it getting out of the driveway." Frank chuckled, slapping Caleb on the back. "Exactly. See, he gets it. We help those who need the push, Amelia. You've always been independent. You'll figure it out. You always do." He tossed a rag at me, which landed on my shoulder. "There's some polish in the garage if you want to shine it up a bit, but we're taking Caleb's new ride for a spin. Don't wait up for dinner." They piled into the Tesla, Frank, Maria, and Caleb. The futuristic door handles extended automatically, glowing with a soft light that seemed to mock the jagged piece of rust in my hand. I watched them pull out, the electric motor humming a silent tune of superiority. They didn't even look back. I was left standing alone in the driveway, the exhaust fumes of their neglect choking me more than any gasoline engine ever could. I looked at the sedan. I looked at the house I helped them paint last summer. I looked at the garden I paid to have landscaped for their anniversary. It wasn't just a car. It was a receipt for 30 years of being the afterthought. The heat inside the 2002 sedan was suffocating. I had been driving for only 15 minutes and my blouse was already sticking to my back. I had tried to turn on the air conditioning, but the only thing that happened was a high-pitched screeching noise from the vents, followed by a blast of hot, dusty air that smelled like dead mice and mildew. I quickly turned it off, rolling down the windows instead. The manual crank on the driver's side was stiff, resisting every turn, and the passenger window didn't budge at all. I merged onto the highway, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The steering was loose, wobbly. Every time the car went over 40 miles per hour, the entire dashboard shook violently, the plastic rattling a chaotic rhythm that set my teeth on edge. I could feel every groove in the road through the seat, the suspension non-existent. I checked the rearview mirror. A piece of duct tape was holding it in place, but the vibration of the car kept making it droop, forcing me to constantly readjust it to see the traffic behind me. "Teaches character," Frank had said. I let out a bitter, dry laugh that was swallowed by the roar of the wind rushing through the open window. Character. That was their code word for neglect. When Caleb got private tutors because he was misunderstood by his teachers, that was support. When I struggled with calculus and stayed up until 3:00 a.m. teaching myself from YouTube videos because they wouldn't pay for help, that was building character. When Caleb got the master bedroom in the basement with the en-suite bathroom, that was because he needed his space. When I slept in the box room that was technically a converted closet, that was because I was low maintenance. A luxury SUV sped past me, and the draft caused the little beige sedan to swerve dangerously to the right. I fought the wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just an insult, it was dangerous. They had put me in a vehicle that was a hazard to operate, and they slept soundly at night thinking they had done me a favor. I pulled off at the next exit, needing a moment to breathe. I steered the rattling heap into the parking lot of a gas station, the brakes squealing loudly enough to turn heads. I killed the engine. It sputtered and coughed for a good 3 seconds before finally dying, and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a text from Maria. "Hope you got home safe. Don't forget, we need you to come over this weekend to help set up Caleb's charging station. Dad doesn't want to pay an electrician, and he says you're good with wires." I stared at the screen. Good with wires. That was how they saw me. Useful, handy, the daughter who worked with computers and tech stuff. To them, my career was a vague blur of typing and fixing Wi-Fi routers. I was the IT support. I was the one who fixed the printer. I was the one who set up the smart TV. They had no idea. They didn't know that good with wires actually meant I was a senior solutions architect for one of the largest fintech firms in the country. They didn't know that the little computer job I did from my home office involved designing secure cloud infrastructure for international banks. They didn't know that my quarterly bonus last month was more than Frank made in a year at the height of his career. I had never told them, not explicitly. I drove a modest hatchback, which was currently in the shop for a routine service, hence why I was even at their house for a ride. I wore simple clothes. I rented a nice but unassuming apartment in the city. I kept my life private because I knew that if they understood the true scale of my finances, I would cease to be their daughter and become their ATM. But looking at that text message, looking at the demand for my labor to install a charger for a car that cost more than my parents' collective life savings, something snapped. They thought I was broke. They thought I was struggling, just scraping by, grateful for a rusty sedan because I had no other options. They thought they held the power because they held the purse strings, or at least the credit cards. I typed a reply, then deleted it. But they had forgotten one crucial thing, I whispered to the empty, stifling car. I can afford to buy and sell their entire reality. I looked up at the dealership across the street. It was a Porsche center. The glass building was pristine, housing rows of engineering perfection. I wasn't going to fix the sedan. I wasn't going to install the charger. I turned the key. The sedan coughed, wheezed, and reluctantly roared back to life. I wasn't going home, not yet. To understand why the Tesla hurt so much, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Miller family. It wasn't just about money. It was about the currency of affection, and I had been bankrupt since birth. Caleb was the firstborn, the son, the heir to a kingdom that didn't exist. Frank, my father, was a man obsessed with appearances. He had worked in mid-level sales his whole life, always chasing the big score, always leasing cars he couldn't afford to look like the boss he never became. To Frank, Caleb was his second chance. He projected all his failed ambitions onto my brother. If Caleb succeeded, Frank succeeded. Maria, my mother, was the enabler. She was a woman who believed that love meant removing all obstacles. If Caleb failed a test, the teacher was biased. If Caleb got fired, the boss was jealous. If Caleb got a DUI, which happened twice, it was just bad luck and youthful indiscretion. I, on the other hand, was the insurance policy. I remember when I was 16. I wanted to go on a school trip to Washington, D.C. It cost $400. I had saved half from babysitting and asked them to match the other half. Frank had sat me down at the kitchen table, his face stern, and gave me a lecture on fiscal responsibility. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Amelia," he had said, pointing a finger at me. "We have a mortgage, we have bills, you can't just expect handouts." 2 days later, Caleb, who was 18 and had just totaled his first car, came home with a brand new gaming setup that cost $2,000. Frank had laughed while helping him set it up. "Boys gotta unwind," he'd said when he saw me watching from the doorway. That was the dynamic. I worked, I saved, I achieved, and I was ignored. Caleb drifted, crashed, burned, and was rewarded. But this time, it felt different. It felt desperate. As I sat at the red light, the sedan idling roughly beneath me, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard a month ago. I had been in the kitchen, fixing a leak under their sink, because why pay a plumber when Amelia is visiting? And they were in the living room. "The retirement account is looking thin, Frank," Maria had whispered. Her voice was anxious. "Don't worry about it," Frank had replied, his voice full of that unearned confidence. "Caleb's big break is coming, that crypto thing he's into, and if that doesn't hit, we have Amelia." "She doesn't make that much, does she?" Maria asked. "She makes enough," Frank said. "She's single, no kids, she doesn't need much. When we're ready to retire, she'll step up. It's her duty. We raised her, didn't we?" The light turned green. I pressed the gas, and the car lurched forward with a groan. "She'll step up." They weren't just favoring Caleb. They were cannibalizing their own future to fund his present, banking on the assumption that I would be there to catch them when they fell. They bought the Tesla not just because they loved him, but because they felt entitled to my future labor to pay for their mistakes. And then there was Caleb himself, the antagonist in my life story who didn't even realize he was the villain because he was too busy starring in his own movie. Caleb was charming in a shallow, oily way. He had that entrepreneur, hustle culture vocabulary down pat. He talked about synergy and disruption while borrowing $20 for gas. The Tesla was his ultimate prop. He didn't have a job to commute to, he didn't have clients to impress. He lived in his girlfriend's apartment, rent-free, and consulted on projects that never seemed to materialize. Frank and Maria saw a visionary. I saw a leech. But the most dangerous thing about a leech isn't its appetite. It's the anesthetic it injects so you don't feel it feeding until it's too late. My parents were numb to him. They were bleeding out financially, taking out second mortgages or cashing in 401ks. I didn't know the source yet, but I knew they didn't have $100,000 cash lying around just to keep his ego inflated. And the rusted keys in my lap? That was them testing the waters. That was them seeing how much disrespect I would swallow. If I accepted the death trap with a smile, if I fixed it up and thanked them, they would know they had me. They would know I was compliant. They would know that when the bill for the Tesla came due, they could slide it across the table to me, and I would pay it. I pulled into the turning lane for the Porsche dealership. I looked at the reflection of the beige sedan in the showroom's towering glass windows. It looked like a blemish, a mistake. I wasn't going to be their retirement plan. I wasn't going to be the safety net. I parked the sedan right in front of the entrance, next to a gleaming 911 GT3. The contrast was comical. A salesman in a sharp suit looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from confusion to wariness as he saw the rusted heap rattle to a halt. I killed the engine. I grabbed my purse. I opened the door, which shrieked in protest, and stepped out onto the pristine pavement. It was time to introduce Frank and Maria to the real Amelia. The salesman's name was David. I knew this because his name tag was polished to a shine that rivaled the cars on the floor. When I had first stepped out of the 2002 sedan, leaving a small puddle of rust-colored condensation. On their pristine pavers, David had approached me with the weary, polite mask of someone preparing to give directions to a lost delivery driver. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his eyes flicking momentarily to the beige disaster behind me. He stood with his hands clasped, acting as a physical barrier between me and the showroom floor. "Yes," I said, my voice calm, stripping away the tremble that had been there only 20 minutes ago. "I'm interested in the 911 Carrera 4S over there, the gentian blue one." David blinked. He looked at my jeans, which were high-quality denim, but jeans nonetheless, and my simple white t-shirt. He looked back at the sedan. "That's a beautiful vehicle. However, test drives usually require a pre-scheduled appointment and a soft credit check, and we close in an hour." "I don't want a test drive," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out my wallet. I extracted my card, the heavy, black anodized metal one that usually stayed tucked away in a hidden slot. I held it out. "I want to buy it. Today, right now. Assuming you have the title in hand and can process the registration electronically." David's gaze dropped to the card. I saw the moment the recognition hit him. His posture changed instantly, shoulders dropped, smile widened, the barrier stance dissolving into a welcoming usher. "Right this way, ma'am. Can I get you an espresso? Sparkling water." "Sparkling water. Lime," I said, walking past him toward the desk. While David ran around frantically getting paperwork started and ensuring the car was detailed for immediate delivery, I sat in the plush leather chair and opened my laptop. I wasn't just killing time. The drive over had cleared the fog of hurt, replacing it with the cold, hard logic that made me excellent at my job. Frank and Maria didn't have money. I knew this for a fact. Frank had been complaining about market inflation and the cost of groceries for 2 years. So how did they drop 6 figures on a Tesla? I logged into the county clerk's public records database. It was a simple search, really. Anyone could do it if they knew where to look, but my parents were technologically illiterate. They thought the cloud was actual weather. I typed in their address. The results populated instantly. My stomach dropped. Recording date, yesterday. Document type, home equity line of credit, HELOC. Lender, Apex Predatory Lending and Trust, not the real name, but close enough. Amount, $150,000. Interest rate, variable, starting at 9.5%. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring slightly. They hadn't used savings. They had leveraged their home, the house they had finally paid off 3 years ago, to buy a toy for Caleb. And not just a standard loan. This was a high-risk, variable-rate line of credit from a lender known for approving bad decisions. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just betting on me to help with retirement, they had actively detonated their financial foundation. They had pulled $150,000 of equity out of the house, $100,000 for the car. Where was the other $50,000? I did another search, court records. Defendant Caleb Miller. Case status, civil judgment outstanding. Amount, $42,000. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Caleb had been sued. A failed business venture? A debt? It didn't matter. They had cashed out their home to pay off his secret debts and buy him a trophy to celebrate it. All set with the preliminary figures, Miss Miller, David said, sliding a sleek tablet across the desk, interrupting my investigation. We're ready for your signature. I looked at the total. It was an exorbitant amount of money, an irresponsible amount for anyone who didn't have my portfolio. But I wasn't buying a car anymore. I was buying a weapon. I was buying a visible, undeniable declaration of independence. I signed. What about the trade-in? David asked delicately, gesturing vaguely toward the window where the beige sedan sat like a wart on the landscape. Scrap it, I said without looking up. Or donate it to a demolition derby. I don't care, just get it out of my sight. The drive back to my parents' house was a sensory experience that bordered on spiritual. The Porsche didn't rattle. It didn't wheeze. It hummed with a predatory grace, the road noise dampened to a whisper, the leather seat hugging me in a way that felt like armor. The air conditioning was crisp and immediate, chilling the sweat that had dried on my back. I had left the house an hour ago as the scapegoat daughter in a death trap. I was returning as a stranger they had never bothered to meet. I turned onto their street. It was a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, lined with modest homes and manicured lawns. As I approached their driveway, I saw them. They were still outside. Of course they were. The Tesla was the new altar, and they were the worshippers. Frank was wiping down the hood with a microfiber cloth, something he had never done for any of my cars. Caleb was sitting. In the driver's seat, the door open, fiddling with the massive touchscreen dashboard. Maria was standing by the flower bed, holding a glass of iced tea, looking on with a beatific smile. I didn't pull into the street parking. I pulled right into the driveway, blocking the Tesla in. The engine note of the 911 was distinct, a low, throaty growl that demanded attention. As I rolled up, Frank looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance at the intrusion. He squinted against the sun, not recognizing the car. I saw the confusion on his face. Who is this? A neighbor? A lost rich person? I put the car in park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. I opened the door and stepped out, my sunglasses shielding my eyes, my purse slung over my shoulder. Amelia, Frank's voice was high, incredulous. He took a step forward, the microfiber cloth dangling from his hand. What? Whose car is this? Caleb popped his head out of the Tesla. His jaw actually dropped. Whoa, is that a 911 4S? Who are you with? I'm not with anyone, I said, leaning against the doorframe of my new car. I crossed my arms. I'm with me. Maria hurried over, looking nervous. Did you rent this? Amelia, that's so expensive. We told you to be careful with your money. You can't afford to rent a car like this just to show off. It's not a rental, Mom, I said calmly. Then whose is it? Frank demanded, walking up to the car and peering into the window, as if looking for the real owner hiding in the backseat. Did a boyfriend lend it to you? Is this your boss's car? It's mine, I said. I held up the key fob sleek, shaped like the silhouette of the car itself. I bought it. Frank froze. He looked at the car, then at me, then back at the car. He laughed, but it was a nervous, stuttering sound. Don't be ridiculous. This is a $150,000 vehicle. You you do computer support. You can't buy this. I'm a senior solutions architect, Dad. I build cloud infrastructure for global banking systems. I corrected him, my voice sharp. And yes, I bought it. Cash, paid in full about 20 minutes ago. Caleb scrambled out of the Tesla. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of greedy fascination mixed with shock. He walked around the Porsche, running his hand along the spoiler. Cash? You have that kind of cash. Get your hands off it, Caleb, I snapped. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. Geez, touchy, I'm just looking. So, wait, if you have this kind of money. Why are you driving that piece of junk Dad gave you? I'm not, I said. I left it at the dealership. I told them to crush it. Frank's face turned a mottled shade of red. You what? That was a perfectly good car. I put new oil in that car. That was a gift. It was an insult, Dad, I said, stepping away from the car so I could look them all in the eye. It was a death trap with bald tires and no AC. You gave Caleb a Tesla and you gave me a ticket to the emergency room. But don't worry, I solved the problem. You have this kind of money? Maria whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide, but I didn't see pride there. I saw calculation. I saw mental math happening in real time. Yes, I said, I do. Well, Frank said, puffing out his chest, trying to regain the dominance he felt slipping away. If you have so much money that you can throw it away on a toy like this, then I expect you to reimburse us for the Tesla, since you're doing so well. The silence that followed Frank's demand was louder than the Porsche's engine had been. The audacity of it hung in the humid air between us. He had skipped right past congratulations, past we had no idea, and landed directly on pay me. Reimburse you, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low, for the gift you bought him. It's about fairness, Amelia, Frank said, finding his footing now. He adopted his head of the household stance, feet apart, hands on hips. We spent our savings on Caleb because he needed a leg up. We thought you were struggling, but clearly you've been hoarding money while watching your family scrape by. It's selfish, really. If you can buy this, you can help the family. We need to pay off the financing on the Tesla. Financing? I cocked my head to the side. I thought you said it was a gift paid for with your savings. Frank blinked, caught it. Well, we use some savings and finance the rest. It's a bridge loan, just until Caleb's business takes off. Stop lying, Frank, I said. I didn't call him Dad. The title didn't fit the man standing in front of me anymore. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I know about the HELOC. The color drained from Maria's face. She reached out and grabbed Frank's arm. Frank. I looked it up at the dealership, I continued, scrolling to the screenshot I had taken. Apex predatory lending, $150,000 against the house, at 9.5% variable interest. You didn't use savings. You mortgaged the roof over your heads. Caleb looked at our parents, confused. Wait, what? You said you cashed out stocks. You said the house was clear. Shut up, Caleb, Frank hissed at him, then turned his fury on me. How dare you spy on us? That is private financial business. I am your father. And you're broke, I said brutally. You took out a loan you can't afford. The monthly payment on that HELOC is going to be close to $1,500 just in interest. You bring home $4,000 a month, Dad, with the mortgage, taxes, and utilities. You can't pay this. We can pay it, Frank shouted, his veins bulging in his neck. And once Caleb's consulting firm hits. Caleb has a $42,000 judgment against him from a lawsuit, I interrupted, dropping the second bomb. Caleb froze. He looked like a deer in headlights. How do you know that? Public records, Caleb. Everything is public if you know where to look. I turned back to Frank. So, let me guess the plan. You took out the equity to pay off Caleb's legal mess and buy the car to make him look successful, hoping he'd scam someone else into investing? And when the monthly payments for the house loan started hitting, who was going to pay them? Me. Maria started to cry. It wasn't a noble cry, it was a weeping of exposure. We just wanted everyone to be okay, we thought. Since you didn't have a husband or kids, you wouldn't mind helping out. You've always been so good with money, Amelia. I'm good with money because I don't spend it on people who treat me like garbage, I said. You ungrateful little. Frank stepped forward, raising a hand as if to point in my face, but he stopped when he looked at the Porsche again. The symbol of my power. He couldn't treat me like a child when I had outpaced him in every metric he valued. You can't drive that here, Caleb said suddenly, his voice petulant. He walked over to the Porsche. It looks ridiculous. You don't even know how to drive a car like this. Let me take it for a spin. I'll tell you if you got ripped off. He reached for the door handle. "Touch that car," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream, "and I will have it towed to the impound lot and report it stolen. And given your record, Caleb, I don't think you want the police involved." Caleb snatched his hand back. "You are tearing this family apart," Frank yelled. "Over a car, over money, after everything we've done for you." "You haven't done anything for me, Dad," I said. "You gave me a rusty key and expected me to say thank you. You mortgaged your future for a son who lies to you, and you plan to stick me with the bill. Well, the bank is closed." "You're not leaving," Frank said, moving to block the driveway, standing in front of my car. "We need to discuss this. We need to figure out a payment plan for the house loan. You are part of this family, and you will contribute." "I am not part of this debt," I said, getting back into the driver's seat, "and I'm not paying a cent." I started the engine. The roar was loud, authoritative. Frank flinched, but he didn't move. He stood there, his face red, his fists clenched, banking on 30 years of intimidation to keep me in place. But I wasn't 16 anymore, and I wasn't driving a car that stalled. I put it in reverse. "Move, Frank," I said through the open window. "Or don't, but I'm leaving." He stared at me, searching for the hesitation that used to be there. He didn't find it. He saw only the cold reflection of his own failures. He stepped aside. As I backed out, leaving them standing in the driveway, Maria sobbing, Caleb sulking, and Frank staring at the pavement, I knew this wasn't over. The reality hadn't fully hit them yet. They still thought they could guilt me back. They didn't realize that by showing me the rusted sedan, they had shown me exactly what I was worth to them. And now that they knew what I was worth to the world, the real desperation was about to set in. The summons came 3 days later. It wasn't a text or a phone call. It was a formal invitation sent via group email to the entire extended family: aunts, uncles, cousins, and even a few neighbors. Subject: a celebration of new beginnings. Join Frank, Maria, and Caleb for a barbecue to celebrate Caleb's new venture and the Miller family's bright future. Sunday, 2 p.m. I stared at the screen of my laptop in my high-rise apartment, sipping coffee that tasted like victory. They were doubling down. They were terrified that the rumors of our driveway confrontation would spread, so they were creating a facade of prosperity to drown out the truth. They needed witnesses to their success, so that if I refused to pay their debts, I would look like the bitter, jealous sister ruining their happiness. I wasn't going to go. My finger hovered over the delete button, but then I saw the reply, all from my Aunt Linda, the family gossip. "So proud of Caleb. Can't wait to see the new car everyone is talking about. Is Amelia coming?" Maria had replied, "Of course, she wouldn't miss her brother's big moment." They were using me as a prop again. If I didn't show, they would spin a narrative about how I was unstable, unsupportive, or struggling. If I did show, they expected me to play nice in front of an audience, banking on the social pressure to keep my mouth shut about the HELOC and the debt. They had forgot the most important rule of war: never invite an enemy who has nothing left to lose into your stronghold. I replied, "I'll be there." Sunday arrived with a sweltering heat. I drove the Porsche, of course. I wore a tailored linen suit that screamed executive, a stark contrast to the faded t-shirts I used to wear to hide myself in their house. When I pulled up, the street was lined with cars. The Tesla was parked prominently on the lawn, literally on the grass, like a museum exhibit. I parked on the street, ensuring my car was visible but not aggressive. I walked up the driveway, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. "There she is," Frank boomed as I entered the backyard. He was manning the grill, wearing a Kiss the Cook apron, sweating profusely. He had a beer in one hand and tongs in the other. He looked manic. The prodigal daughter returns. The backyard was full. Aunt Linda, Uncle Bob, cousins I hadn't seen in years. They all turned to look. Caleb was holding court by the cooler, wearing a crisp button-down shirt that I knew cost more than the weekly grocery budget. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "Amelia," Maria rushed over, grabbing my arm with a grip that was painful. She leaned in, whispering through a clenched smile. "Don't you dare cause a scene. We are celebrating. Just smile and eat a burger." "I'm not hungry, Mom," I said, pulling my arm away. "So, Amelia," Uncle Bob called out, gesturing with a hot dog. "Frank tells us you bought yourself a little sports car, finally spending some of that IT money, huh?" "Something like that," I said, walking toward the center of the patio. "And Caleb," Aunt Linda gushed, turning to my brother. "A Tesla Plaid. My goodness, Frank, you must have done well with those stocks this year to treat him like that." Frank puffed out his chest. "Well, you know, family comes first. Caleb's business is about to explode, so we wanted to make sure he looked the part." "What business is that exactly?" I asked. The chatter died down. The question was simple, but the tone cut through the humidity like a blade. Caleb cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "It's, blockchain consulting, high-level stuff, synergy optimization for crypto assets." "Fascinating," I said, opening my leather portfolio. "Because I did a little digging into Miller Consulting Group." "Amelia, stop," Frank warned, stepping away from the grill. "Not now." "I think now is the perfect time," I said, pulling out a sheaf of papers. "Since you've invited everyone to celebrate the family's financial future, they should know what that future actually looks like." I held up the first document. This is a record of the LLC Caleb registered. It was dissolved by the state 6 months ago for failure to pay taxes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Caleb's face went pale. "That was a filing error. My accountant messed up." "You don't have an accountant, Caleb," I said calmly. I pulled out the next paper. "And this is the lawsuit judgment I mentioned. $42,000 owed to a landlord for a commercial space you rented and never used, but threw parties in until you were evicted." "That's a lie," Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. "She's lying. She's just jealous because Dad bought me the Tesla." "Let's talk about the Tesla," I said, turning to Aunt Linda. "Dad told you he bought it with stock earnings, right?" "That's what he said," Linda murmured, looking between Frank and me. "This," I said, holding up the deed of trust document, "is the public filing for a home equity line of credit taken out on this house 4 days ago, for $150,000, at 9% interest." The silence was absolute. The only sound was the sizzling of burgers burning on the unattended grill. "Frank," Uncle Bob said, his voice grave, "you mortgaged the house. You told me you were debt-free." "It's an investment," Frank yelled, throwing the tongs down. "Amelia, get out. You are trying to humiliate us." "I'm trying to save you," I snapped, losing my cool composure for the first time. I turned to my mother. "Mom, look at these numbers. Do you know what happens when you can't make the payments? The bank takes the house. This house, where you live. And Caleb, he can't pay it. He has no income. He has no business. He is drowning in debt, and he just dragged you down with him." Maria looked at the papers in my hand, then at Caleb. "Caleb, you said the investors were waiting on the car. You said the money was coming next week." Caleb looked cornered. He looked at the Tesla, then at his feet. It is coming. I just need more time. Amelia doesn't understand how business works." "I understand math," I said, "and the math says you are bankrupt." I turned to the crowd, to the family that had watched me be the scapegoat for decades. My parents tried to give me a broken car to keep me in my place while they bankrupt themselves for a lie. I'm done. I'm not bailing them out. So if anyone here wants to lend Frank money to pay his mortgage next month, get your checkbooks ready, because the bank is coming. "Amelia," Frank lunged toward me, his face purple with rage. Uncle Bob stepped in front of him, holding him back. "Frank, settle down," Bob said, his voice stern. "She's showing you the papers, Frank. Is it true?" Frank stopped, panting, looking around at the circle of judging faces. He looked at the Tesla, which suddenly looked less like a trophy and more like a tombstone. He slumped, the fight draining out of him. We wanted him to have a chance," Frank whispered. "You gave him a chance," I said, closing my portfolio. "You gave him every chance, and he sold you out." I looked at Caleb. He wasn't looking at our parents. He was looking at his phone, probably trying to figure out if he could sell the car before the bank froze the assets. "Happy launch party," I said. I turned and walked back down the driveway. Behind me, I heard Maria start to sob, a deep, guttural sound of realization. I heard Frank arguing with Bob. I heard the house of cards collapsing. I got into my Porsche, the engine roaring to life, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as the math had predicted. Within a week, the Miller family future had disintegrated. My public exposure at the barbecue had shattered the illusion Frank and Maria had been clinging to. Uncle Bob, who was a CPA, had sat them down that very afternoon and gone through their finances. He called me later that night, his voice subdued. "It's worse than you thought, Amelia," he had said. "They didn't just take the HELOC, they have credit card debt. They've been funding Caleb's lifestyle for years on high-interest plastic. They are insolvent." I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like reading about a tragedy in a newspaper. "I know, Uncle Bob, but I can't fix it. I won't." "I know," he said. "I told them that. I told them they have to sell the Tesla immediately." They tried. Oh, they tried. But because they had rolled the negative equity from Caleb's previous vehicle, a truck he had gotten bored of, into the Tesla loan, they were underwater. Selling the car wouldn't even cover the loan balance. The Tesla was repossessed 3 weeks later. A tow truck came in the middle of the day, dragging the electric beast off the lawn while the neighbors watched. It was the ultimate humiliation for Frank. Caleb didn't stick around to see it. Once the money tap turned off, he vanished. He moved in with a friend in another state, leaving behind a text message blaming our parents for not believing in his vision and me for sabotaging his success. He took no responsibility. He never would. But at least he was gone, and he could no longer bleed them dry. 2 months after the barbecue, I received a call from Maria. I was in my home office, reviewing blueprints for a new data center in Zurich. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello." Amelia, her voice was small, frail. It sounded like she had aged 10 years. "Hi, I didn't know if you would answer." "I'm here, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We sold the house," she said. The words came out in a rush, followed by a jagged breath. "The bank accepted a short sale to cover the HELOC. We have to be out by the 1st of the month." "I see," I said. I felt the weight of that. The house I grew up in. The house where I had hidden in the closet to study. The house where I was ignored. "Where will you go?" "We found a small apartment," she said. "A 1-bedroom. It's in a rougher part of town, but it's what we can afford on your father's pension. Bob helped us budget." There was a long silence. "Amelia," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I went into your old room to pack. I found your old report cards, the ones you used to try to show us. I found the drawings you made." I closed my eyes. "Mom, don't." "We were so wrong," she sobbed. "We were so blind. We spent our lives watering a weed and ignored the flower. You were right. You were right about everything. That rusted car? God, Amelia, I am so sorry. I am so sorry we didn't see you." It wasn't a fix. It didn't undo 30 years of neglect. It didn't give me back my childhood. But it was the tea. Ruth, and for the first time in my life, the apology wasn't followed by a request for money. "Thank you for saying that," I said softly. Will you ever come visit us?" she asked. "In the apartment? I promise, no Caleb, just us. I want to get to know my daughter, the architect." I looked out the window at the city skyline, at the life I had built with my own 2 hands. I had justice. I had vindication. And now I had the one thing I had stopped hoping for, acknowledgement. "Maybe," I said. "Give me some time, but maybe." "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we love you, Amelia, we really do." "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up. I sat there for a long time in the silence of my beautiful, paid-off apartment. I wasn't going to rush back. I wasn't going to save them from the consequences of their actions. They had to live in that small apartment. They had to drive a used car. They had to learn the lessons they had tried to force on me. But as I looked at the rusted key I had kept, not the car key, but the key to their house, which I now dropped into the trash can, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the safety net anymore. I wasn't the backup plan. I was Amelia Miller, and for the first time, that was enough.